Initially, there were set to be two big MMA cards this weekend in Southern California, but alas, UFC 233 went the way of the dodo bird, and we're left with one, and it's not a very bad one at all. Bellator 214 is Saturday at the Forum in Inglewood, pitting Fedor Emelianenko, the legend, the last emperor, against Ryan Bader for the Bellator heavyweight title. My name is Marc Raimondi from MMAfighting.com. I'm alongside this man, Dave Doyle from MMAfighting.com, and this is the Bellator 214 preview show from Los Angeles, right near LAX, the airport. I think the government is no longer shut down, so I think TSA is working back again a little bit more fluidly. And we have a big fight card coming up on Saturday, Dave. And the main event is an incredibly intriguing one. And really the whole card is interesting. And we were actually talking before the show, and you were saying that this almost feels like an old Scott Coker Strikeforce show a little bit. Does it not?
In a way, a couple nights ago, I was at home and I was writing. I just happened to have Showtime on in the background, and the last Strikeforce card from Oklahoma City came on the screen. And at the beginning, there was just a little montage about the history, and it showed everyone from Ronda Rousey, Miesha Tate, Daniel Cormier, and then everyone who's made their mark since, like Luke Rockhold and Jacare and everyone. And it just kind of dawned on me as we were in the middle of fight week here that this kind of has the same vibe as all those Strikeforce cards, Like we have the legend of the sport, Fedor Emelianenko, fighting somehow all these years later, still relevant, still fresh. You've got Jake Hager, the former WWE champion, as the kind of novelty sort of fight. You've got an absolute cracker of a fight in Juan Archuleta and Ricky Bandejas.
Right.
Just all up and down the line here, and it just kind of has that vibe to me, a little bit of everything. It feels like maybe Scott Coker's finally finding that Strikeforce mojo with Bellator.
And we will talk about all those aforementioned fights right now, beginning with the main event, Fedor versus Bader. Fedor Emelianenko is 42 years old, Dave. If he were to pull off this Bellator heavyweight Grand Prix final, this Bellator heavyweight title fight, is there any doubt at that point? Also beating a much younger man in Ryan Bader, who is a UFC contender. Is there any doubt at that point that Fedor Emelianenko is the best heavyweight in the history of MMA? Or is there still some lingering, you're not sure?
I mean, first of all, let's start with this. No matter what, just him getting to this point has been amazing. Before this tournament, you saw him lose in quick order to Matt Mitrione. And to fans here in America, Fedor had won some fights overseas, but fans here in America had just remembered all his losses in Strikeforce. So it just kind of seemed like, okay, this is really starting to get sad. And then he comes out. It's already been a huge accomplishment just getting here, smoking Frank Mir the way he did, finishing Chael Sonnen. I don't know that it necessarily would cement him as the greatest of all time again, just because there have been too much going on. Daniel Cormier might have that at this point, But that said, it would certainly be one of the greatest accomplishments in the history of the sport if he was to pull this off at this age.
And certainly nothing that anyone would have expected in 2015 when he came out of retirement, right?
Absolutely. Like I had said, he really seemed like he was done, and then maybe he was just coming back for another paycheck or two. But, he's looked dominant in quick flurries of fights the last couple times out.
So he's 42 years old, and earlier this week at the open workouts, he was pretty honest about saying that he knows that his time is coming up, and he realizes that retirement is close by, and would not give a denial when asked, could this be his last fight? And as we know, Fedor is not much for talking. And I think some of those quotes were illuminating. Do you think this could be it, Dave, for Fedor Emelianenko, win or lose?
Maybe. I think it kind of depends on how he goes out. If Ryan Bader comes out and makes Fedor look really bad, there's part of me that's going to want to think the way Fedor operates that he's going to want to have one last hurrah, maybe go back to Russia and fight one more time and have, a set-off where that ends a little more gloriously than the way he went out. Because that's how it went down last time, right? He lost 3 straight times in Strikeforce and then went back and took a couple of easy fights back there. My gut feeling is no, this won't be the final time to see him.
Would be fitting, and we so rarely see it, to have a legend like that go out on a win. It would be an amazing story if Fedor was able to pull off this victory, the tournament, the heavyweight title, and ride off into the sunset. We'll see what happens as far as that goes. Ryan Bader is a guy that was a very good UFC fighter for a very long time. He's on a 2-fight winning streak coming out of the UFC, signed a free agent deal with Bellator. He was always kind of the bridesmaid, never the bride in the UFC, so to speak. John Jones was the king of the light heavyweight division for a long time. Now Ryan Bader in Bellator, he's light heavyweight champion. He's on the verge of possibly winning this heavyweight tournament. Has Bader kind of reformed his image a little bit in Bellator? Do people think of him differently now than they did maybe back when he was in the UFC?
I think people do. I think, look, this is bigger than Ryan Bader. There's been a shift in perception in this sport. The idea that if you leave the UFC, you can't hack it. I feel like that's really changing now when you see all the big names that have not just gone to Bellator, but won, and everyone has elite talent now. And if anything, I feel like Ryan Bader was a bit of a trailblazer in that regard. He wasn't the first big name to go over to Bellator, but he was in that first initial wave of real guys who were still in their prime who made that jump. And it feels like out of everyone who's jumped, he's made the most out of it. He's in the situation where, we're at a point now. Bellator's been around for 10 years. For him to be the first champ in Bellator means something that maybe it wouldn't have a few years ago. So the perception has changed, but I also think it's a part of the greater change of perception in the sport.
So Bader in the first round had that quick knockout of King Mo Lawal. Second round, he absolutely dominated Matt Mitrione. He's the heavy favorite going into this fight, Dave. Does he have the huge advantage like many believe he does, or are we still thinking that there's that Fedor mystique here?
The mystique's there. Look, I think as long as Ryan isn't dumb enough to wander right into a position where he can eat one of Fedor's big shots, I think I have a very hard time seeing Ryan Bader losing this fight. And this is not the same Ryan Bader who wandered right into a Lyoto Machida knockout a few years ago. This is a smarter fighter, a more experienced fighter, a fighter who understands the entire game in the way that he really didn't when he was younger. To me, I'm not ruling out the idea that Fedor could catch him and could win this fight, but I have a really hard time seeing it.
Since you gave me the prediction already, is there a path for Fedor, you think? Is it just that one hitter quitter, that one punch knockout power, or do you think that Fedor?
I mean, look, if he gets in close, Fedor, if he gets in close and starts landing kind of dirty boxing type shots, sure, he can do it that way as well. But if he's going to do it, it's going to be by strikes and it's going to be in the stand-up.
Fair. Co-main event, moving on to that, Aaron Pico, one of the best prospects in MMA history against Henry Corrales. Is it time to stop calling Pico a prospect, or do you think there's still more for him to do?
I think we're right on the edge of, I feel like the perception's changing now, right? Like, no one's questioning the fact that he's in the co-main event. I know it's because another title fight dropped out, but it doesn't seem wrong that Aaron Pico is in the co-featured bout here, especially when you see what we've seen from him, just the way he just mauled people, fight after fight after fight. And this is a legit opponent he's facing in Henry Corrales. This is not a pushover. This is not someone they brought in just to lose. Henry Corrales is a guy who, he got some big fights a bit too early in Bellator. He lost 3 fights in a row, and he made a big, got in his head, I need to change. He went out to the MMA lab. He's training with guys like Benson Henderson. He's won 4 fights in a row. And this is going to be a legit test for Aaron Pico. And no, I think if Aaron Pico shines again, then it's time to stop thinking of him as a prospect and thinking of him as a guy who's well on his way to being a breakout star.
We have seen, Dave, in Corrales' 4-fight winning streak that he has knockout power, especially in his right hand. And we've also seen Aaron Pico be somewhat susceptible to taking damage, especially in his debut fight against Zach Freeman where he got knocked down and got choked out. Is that the path for Corrales, do you think? And is it a reasonable thing to think that this could actually happen where Corrales could catch him?
He could, sure. And I think it's one of those things where when you have a guy that is well on his way up to stardom, you want to fight the guy earlier on rather than later when he becomes a more fully formed fighter. Yes, that's his opening, and still I don't see it happen because Pico's just such a smart fighter. We see him improve just by leaps and bounds each time out. I think it's going to turn into a firefight, but I think Pico just has too much power and will just overwhelm him like we've seen everyone else he's faced.
So if Pico were to get by Corrales, who is, again, on a 4-fight winning streak, what do you do? Do you throw him into a title fight with Patricio Pitbull at the age of 22? It's one of those things where if Pico wins, Scott Coker and company have an enigma on their hands because not only that, Aaron Pico's teammate, AJ McKee, who he will not fight, they've said many times, is also on a huge winning streak and also kind of primed for a title shot in the near future. So what do you do?
He's real close. You know, if he's, I don't know, it does still seem like a little bit early to do that, but I think this is something where we have to wait and see what happens, and you know, maybe ask me that question again in the post-fight show.
Maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit.
But let's see how this pans out. You know, maybe it's possible, but it does seem a bit early.
Fair. Prediction for Pico versus Corrales. How do you see it playing out?
First round knockout for Pico.
Wow. Quickly?
No, it's almost like a Nick Diaz, Paul Daly type of crazy, all over the place round before Pico gets it done.
You're all about Strikeforce today.
I told you, man.
You're all about these comparisons.
This field has a Strikeforce vibe.
It will be interesting to see if we finally see Pico's vaunted wrestling, which we have not seen yet. We've only seen his boxing, which has done very well, but he's a great wrestler too. Speaking of wrestling, amateur and professional, Dave, Jake Hager, the former Jack Swagger in WWE, the former WWE World Heavyweight Champion, is making his MMA debut on this card against J.W. Kaiser. So this is what we know about Jake Hager. He was a pro wrestler for about 12 years, but before that he was an All-American at Oklahoma, had 30 pins his senior year. He was a very good heavyweight wrestler. But that was a long time ago. That was college. He's 36 years old now. What are legitimate expectations for Jake Hager in this fight and also moving forward?
You know, with someone like this in these types of situations, it really is kind of like a wait and see sort of thing, because we don't know, because he doesn't. Yes, he, like you said, he was a very aggressive wrestler at Oklahoma, but he wasn't. We don't have a body of like amateur fighting to go with here, and it's been a long time since he's been in a competitive situation. You know, he's obviously handled the pressure of being under bright lights and of performing in front of, you know, thousands and thousands of people, and excelled in that. And, you know, people who hate pro wrestling might laugh at that, but there is a lot of pressure involved in that. But it all comes down to, you know, CM Punk couldn't handle being punched in the face. We'll see if Jake can. That really, when you have a former pro wrestler, that's really kind of what it comes down to. And this guy Kaiser, who's a real interesting dude, who you'll have to check out my story on MMA fighting on him tomorrow.
I was going to ask you. I want to hear. Just can you give us a little bit of a taste? I mean, this is a guy that he's 1-1 in MMA, but he has a wealth of experience in other combat sports ventures, right?
41-year-old guy, had his first amateur boxing fight at age 14, 30 amateur boxing fights, 13 amateur MMA fights, has had 2 pro fights. They're really obviously bringing him in to lose, and he is fully aware of this. But, you know, I don't know. I had half convinced myself that Kaiser had a chance of tagging him, and then I saw those two at the weigh-ins today and saw the monstrous physical disparities between the two. It's hard to see it, but, you know, for this guy Kaiser, for someone who just plugged away at tiny little amateur shows in the Midwest all this time, he's happy just to say that, hey, I fought at the Forum once, which is good for him, but doesn't necessarily bode well for his prospects once the fight actually starts.
So I will ask you, and by the way, Hager did actually look like he was in incredible shape, perhaps even in better shape than he was during his WWE run. A prediction for Hager versus Kaiser?
I think Hager takes him down, ground and pounds him. You know, he seems to be a guy that would be smart enough to avoid getting into a brawl with a brawler. So, you know, takes him down, ground and pound him. It might be a little bit of feeling out, a little ugly at first, but he'll get the job done.
Very quickly, a fight that's probably under the radar a little bit is Juan Archuleta versus Ricky Bandejas. Archuleta is 21-1, teammate of TJ Dillashaw, a prospect for Bellator. Bandejas just finished James Gallagher, Conor McGregor's teammate. It's kind of a battle of UFC star teammates. How do you see that one playing out, and do you think this could steal the show, this fight?
Absolutely. This seems like a real fun scrap, you know? Like you just said, Bandejas just ended the James Gallagher hype train, and he just derailed that thing. And Archuleta's a guy on a 16-fight win streak who, I talked to him yesterday. He really seems to be ready to seize this moment, because all his Bellator fights were on the, the WinStar Casino circuit. So to actually get his opportunity on this A show and to show what he can do. It sounds like a guy who's ready to shine, and I'm having a hard time picking it, because both of these guys are real good, real motivated. It could be a show stealer of a fight, and might set up a championship fight. Absolutely,
it'll be a fun night. I think there'll be some interesting side activities that Scott Coker's been known for over the years. R-Truth of WWE is walking out Jake Hager for his fight. Chris Pratt will be in the corner of Adel El Tamini for his main card opening fight against Brandon McMahon.
Young Bucks will be in attendance.
Possibly even the Young Bucks of All Elite Wrestling fame will be in attendance, but we will have to wait until tomorrow night's post-fight show to find out if that was indeed the case. So we will wrap it up from here. Dave, Mark, we will see you guys soon. Please stay posted at MMAfighting.com for all of your Bellator 214 coverage.